She's going to try to stop by if she can. I do have to shout out that her work on these issues has been incredible in pulling legislators together and keeping us informed of the issues affecting early childhood learning in the state of Kansas. We have a very wonderful meeting agenda today. We're going to learn about how early childhood is funded in the state of Kansas, and I am just going to turn this over to Melissa Rooker, the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. Welcome today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Poskin, and my lovely assistant here is going to start some slides for us. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me to address both caucuses today, both early learning and Johnson County. We appreciate your interest in covering the topic of early childhood funding in Kansas. It is a lot. There's a lot of ground to cover, and so it would probably help me get through it all if we held questions till the slides are done, if that's okay. So just make notes if you see something and have questions, we can get back to it. So we can move to the next slide. First, I want to set the tone, the importance of early childhood. We know from decades of research that the early years are the most important for a child's brain development, with 90% of this occurring by the time a child is 5 years old. There are more than 1 million new neural connections that form every second during this stage, particularly the first 3 years of life, those first 1,000 days or so. It is faster than at any other developmental stage in human development. Researchers refer to this as the brain architecture. Think of it like when you're building a house. This is the wiring that forms the connections and the pathways so that all of our behavior and thinking and learning it's all anchored in that structural work that's happening at that age. Every interaction a child has during this phase of life has consequences, both for better and for worse, that relate later on to how they do in school, on the job, with their health outcomes, in relationships, etc. Research also tells us the effectiveness of treatment for issues at later stages pales in comparison to the effectiveness of early intervention, and the costs are far greater later on. Neglect, stress, and adverse childhood experiences, on the other hand, leave gaps and weaknesses in the development of brain architecture, which negatively impacts cognitive, emotional, and social development. When we fail to invest during the first 5 years, we miss a huge window of opportunity. These costs show up in the form of significant downstream expenses related to healthcare, foster care, the justice system, and so much more. We end up paying for this one way or the other. It's just that we get better outcomes when we invest early on. Put it another way, we have 1,825 days from the day a child is born until they celebrate their 5th birthday. What happens during that time will follow them for the rest of their lives. So it's imperative for us to lay the groundwork for our children to have the best possible start in life. And then one other note, as a key consideration, is the role childcare plays as an economic issue. According to the Bipartisan Policy Center, the long-term economic impact of insufficient childcare capacity in Kansas amounts to over $2 billion in lost economic activity each year. We can go to the next slide. There are multiple research studies, longitudinal studies, that have measured the impact of quality early childhood programming across the life course. Outcomes have proven to be better across a range of metrics for our children who have had access to high-quality early learning environments. And I want to pause, and I want to make sure you understand that when we say high-quality early learning environments, that can be anywhere that a baby or a young child is cared for, and it does not mean that we're advocating for early schooling for babies and toddlers. It means the people caring for our children, whether it's members of our own family, whether it's childcare providers, wherever our kids are being cared for, we want that to involve healthy interactions that are designed to nurture and enrich a child's developing brain. That's learning through play. That's serve and return conversations with a babbling baby. That's reading to a child. It's having good quality interactions. We know that when a young child enters kindergarten equipped with pre-reading and math skills along with school-appropriate behavior, there is an 82% chance that child will master reading, math, and social emotional skills by age 11. This drops to 45% for children who are not school-ready. Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman has researched long-term effects of high-quality early childhood education. The Heckman equation quantifies the long-term ROI of investment in early childhood programs that focus on both social and emotional development and cognitive development as having 7 to 13% year impact on a greater ROI, which is significantly higher than many other forms of public programs. His research analyzes a wide variety of life outcomes related to health, crime and incarceration rates, substance abuse, IQ, educational outcomes, and attainment and earnings. The Children's Cabinet has our very own longitudinal study that was conducted by the Wichita State University School of Education in 2019. They studied children who attended the Opportunity Project, known as TOP, in Wichita, which is one of our early childhood block grant grantees. With parent consent, TOP students were followed from preschool through high school graduation, using a control group of demographically matched peers who did not attend TOP or a similar preschool. The study shows TOP students consistently demonstrate better educational outcomes. On state reading assessments, TOP graduates were 23% more likely to meet or exceed reading standards than the control group peers. TOP graduates are 35% less likely than a demographically matched control group to be involved in special education services. On average, TOP graduates had higher attendance rates, lower repeat discipline referrals, and higher GPAs. There are also multiple evaluations of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library that have found having access to age-appropriate reading materials in the home through program participation increased kindergarten readiness. Arkansas's study found that kindergarten readiness increased by 28.9% for kids enrolled in the program, and their reading scale scores improved by 11% at the end of third grade, just by having those books mailed to the home. We can move to the next slide. When we speak of early childhood in Kansas, we describe an ecosystem focused on young children and their families. The image on screen represents the variety of programs and services adopted by our 4 key state agencies, DCF, KDHE, KSDE, and the Cabinet. This mixed delivery system and this framework helps guide the work that we've done. It guides investments at the Cabinet and is the range of services that we think about when we talk early childhood. Children's needs are as complex and individual as they are, which is why the ecosystem encompasses such a wide range of services. We recognize that not everyone needs every one of these things. The services will be specific to the situation a given family is facing and subject to their own personal preferences. We can move to the next slide, please. The figures on screen are derived from the Kansas Distinct Count of Children Data Dashboard, which the Cabinet rolled out in the fall. While a concerted effort has been made to accurately count the number of children served by our mixed delivery system, we do not have an unduplicated count of children receiving services in Kansas due to the limitations of the available data. And this is not the complete range of services. This is just an idea for you to understand. We do know we have 212,462 children in Kansas under the age of 6, and that we have 113,523 enrollments in the various universe of programs. But what I can't tell you is if there's duplication. So when you see the breakout, I can't tell you if the 12,321 children getting home visiting are also enrolled in something else. But we do know for each program how many kids are getting services. We also have county level data, and every county in the state has children receiving services of some kind. The key takeaway for us is that there are many more children needing services than we currently have the funding to provide. We can move to the next slide. We also know that where services are delivered is dependent on the nature of the service, community characteristics, and family preferences. Unlike other sectors, such as medicine or education, services are provided in a variety of spaces for early childhood and often meet the family where they are, literally. So some services like preschool and special education are school-based. Some programs like home visiting and childcare can be home-based. Some are community-based and include programs provided by the public sector, the private sector, the faith-based organizations, for-profit entities, nonprofit entities. It's a whole mixed universe of program providers. We often see a combination of school and community-based programs working together. We can move to the next slide. State and federal funding offsets some of the expenses involved and provides programs targeted to particular populations based on certain criteria. So risk factors are often used, income eligibility is often used, but there is federal funding. We also have certain state funding that constitutes categorical aid. So the 4-year-old at-risk component of the school finance formula, special education funding, things like that. Increasingly, private foundations in the business sector are responding to the research and the need that they see in their communities. In the case of childcare, it's families who shoulder the lion's share of the cost, although some do qualify for the childcare subsidy, which is federally funded with state matching funds derived from tobacco dollars and some from state general fund. We can move to the next slide, please. This slide shows the key funding streams which provide some of the support for early childhood services. Federal programs provide the predominant source of early childhood funding, and you can see the long list of different programs. State matching funds are provided through SGF and the Master Tobacco Settlement. And just as an aside, for FY24, the Children's Initiative Fund budget is roughly $57 million exclusively funded by tobacco dollars. In some cases, local communities provide local forms of support, usually sales or property tax derived, to support early childhood programs in their local area. And as mentioned, the private sector is another really key ingredient in our ecosystem. On the following slides, we'll look at the flow of funds for 3 types of early childhood services: childcare, home visiting, and preschool. We can move on. This first one is childcare, and I want to pause for all 3 of these slides. Every arrow that you see on screen equates to red tape. Every arrow is a layer of the bureaucracy that's involved. It's another step in the flow of funding, and it's another set of reporting and compliance requirements. So every place the money moves, there's an expectation that you've got certain requirements to meet that could be better organized. This is a very tangled system of funding that has financial implications and efficiency costs. Childcare tuition assistance is funded with federal childcare development block grant funding administered by DCF. We use SGF and CIF dollars to combine to provide the state match required to draw down these federal funds. DCF, in addition to paying the subsidy that families qualify for, also transfers some of these funds to KDHE to support childcare licensing. We also have fee funds charged of childcare providers for licensing that helps support that, and a little bit of SGF as well. DCF also uses the CCDF funding to support childcare quality improvement efforts. Those are through agreements with outside partners such as Child Care Aware and Kansas Child Care Training Opportunities, and our CIF helps support some of this work as well. We can move to the next slide. Home visiting in Kansas, we operate 8 different models of home visiting through a whole multitude of providers. This map captures the maze of governmental entities that fund home visiting in Kansas. Through the state, it's CIF, it's SGF, we have federal early Head Start, some TANF, some Family First, some McVie Title V. But this is not an exhaustive list because there's also private sector funding in the form of grants that help support home visiting services in Kansas. From the community level, this means that each organization delivering these services has to apply to multiple state agencies to piece together funding and create their own little system at the local level. This type of burden to secure funds absorbs staff time on both sides of the equation and detracts from focusing service delivery on meeting family needs. It also means that there is no single agency that holds accountability for outcomes, nor do we operate a true continuum of services that makes any sense at all. We can move to the next one. The preschool fiscal map is a little cleaner because all of the programs are operated through KSDE. They are funded through a combination of federal funding through IDEA for Part C and Part B services for special education. It's categorical aid. I mentioned the 4-year-old at-risk component of the school finance formula and some of the special ed funding. And then Kansas Preschool Pilot is a combination of TANF funding and Children's Initiative funds. We can move to the next slide. Parents don't really care how the system is funded. They just know they need the services to work together so that they can meet the needs their family has and make sure they have safe, reliable childcare for their children so they can report to work. They lack the time it takes to contact multiple agencies and find it frustrating when they're sent to multiple places to patch together the services their children need. Employers need their families to be confident in their childcare options because it greatly affects absenteeism at work when childcare falls through. We've been conducting comprehensive needs assessments of the Kansas early childhood system since 2019, but what we find throughout each year is that the original central messages continue to hold true today. Geography fundamentally shapes family access to programs and services, and we have far too many children growing up in Kansas today whose basic needs are not being met. We can move to the next slide. In 2023, the Kansas Early Childhood Transition Task Force asked stakeholders to identify concerns about the current system. Over 500 Kansans weighed in on that listening tour in June. These challenges mirror the results of our own 2024 needs assessment, which we are in the process of publishing. Collaboration across state agencies and organizations has certainly increased, creating greater efficiency and increased access to services. However, inherent limitations remain in a coordinated governance model, which is what we operate. We're trying to coordinate across multiple agencies. It includes fiscal and regulatory differences across the agencies and a lack of centralized decision-making authority. For families, it means they continue to experience a fragmented system that's too often unresponsive to their needs and otherwise inaccessible. Unifying governance will create clearer authority and accountability in terms of addressing these issues. Next slide. We've stretched our current structure as far as it will go. You see it on screen. This is the current system. It is siloed as depicted here, and it's important to note that there are also interior silos, departments and different sectors within each state agency. And this structure just does not equip us to provide the type of experience that our Kansas families expect. Next slide. On screen, you see the recommended changes to our governance structure through the bill that would reorganize as the Kansas Office of Early Childhood. Early childhood services are interconnected in many ways, but having multiple agencies overseeing the system adds difficulty for all concerned. States have seen unifying governance as a key step toward improving the process of managing the early childhood system. Georgia was the first state in 2004 under then Governor Sonny Perdue to do this, and now roughly half the states in the country have unified governance, including about a dozen that have consolidated multiple early childhood functions into an existing state agency, as Kansas proposes to do. In the last 5 years alone, Minnesota, Colorado, North Dakota, Oregon, Missouri, and New Mexico, in reverse chronological order, have unified their early childhood governance. Other state legislatures considering the issue this spring include Idaho and Illinois. What other states have done is instructive but not determinative, and no structure will be perfect for addressing all of our issues. But it is widely understood among Kansas stakeholders that our current approach is not the best approach for Kansas. Unifying governance in the Office of Early Childhood will provide clear authority and accountability for addressing the issues mentioned earlier. It brings together existing programs and services to minimize the burden on families. It streamlines the flow of funding to help us manage funds more effectively and reduce the layers of administration. The administrative state itself becomes more streamlined. It gives lawmakers a central resource for information and assistance with constituent concerns, and centralizes accountability to help us better define and monitor service quality and facilitate quality improvement. It should also translate to an expansion to services and access to care, and most importantly, the goal is to improve outcomes for Kansas children and their families. So last slide is just my contact information. That is the condensed version, the super condensed version, and I know it's a lot to absorb. So this is contact information. I work across the street in the Landon office building here every day. So if any of you want to sit down and have a deeper dive, I'm happy to come back. But at this time, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was the condensed version. But what I appreciate about that is that it leaves a lot of time for questions, and we have tons of legislators in the room on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the chamber, all who care about Kansas children. So I will take questions and start with Senator Sykes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your work on the Children's Cabinet. I served on that for a short period of time, and it's one of the highlights of my legislative career. And I think you started saying, we are paying for childcare. We're just probably paying in the least effective manner. So as we're looking at governance for early childhood, can you talk about how the Children's Cabinet has really been a leader in this, and looking at LPA audits, and how you have structured that, and how we need that kind of overall structure?
I appreciate that question very much. The Children's Cabinet was formed in 1999 as a response to the state participation in the Master Tobacco Settlement. The cabinet was created with a 9-member governing board to manage the investments through the Children's Initiatives Fund. The Kansas Endowment for Youth was set up as intended to be an endowment, a true endowment that by now should be spinning off enough interest to make our CIF budget self-sustaining. Didn't happen that way, but the key fund receives the tobacco settlement each year, and then the mechanism in state law says that it will transfer funds based on your legislative budget process. The Children's Initiative Fund is part of that budget. We set the amount of the transfers, and it transfers from the key fund to the CIF. The Children's Cabinet Governing Board has a lot of very specific responsibilities outlined in the law to advise the governor and the legislature, to be this point of coordination among state agencies, to identify barriers and gaps in service and make recommendations for how we can use funds more effectively. So in the process of doing that, we also are required to drive investments to evidence-based models using data and an annual accountability report. The cabinet adopted, years before I arrived on scene, adopted what's known as the Blueprint for Early Childhood. That blueprint focuses on 3 pillars: healthy development, strong families, and early learning, because we know that the kind of services that are needed in those categories, parent education through parents as teachers, or a universal kind of healthy families home visiting program, that kind of universal parent education effort demonstrates reduction in substance abuse, reduction in out-of-home placements. We've done some specific studies of the effect of our investments in the prevention space. So we focus on what is known as primary prevention, which is way upstream before a problem occurs. Secondary is when a family's facing some crisis, some trouble, and nothing bad has happened yet, but you are in a gray area where bad things could happen. So you intervene with secondary prevention. Tertiary is when the bad things have happened and you've got to get in and help fix it and take care of things. So foster care is tertiary. We try and go way upstream and prevent any of those crises from hurting children.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Melissa, thanks for being here. You made a statement that geography shapes services. Can you identify what you think some of those services are that are the most lacking, and the geographical areas that are in greatest need?
I don't know that it's any one thing. I think, and what we mean by that is not the traditional assumption that if you're in a rural community, you are far removed from services. Even in the heart of a population center, where you live in a community affects your ability to easily connect to services. So for families, it may be a lack of spaces in a childcare program. It may be a family that doesn't have transportation to drive 30 miles to get to something. It is, and I don't know that, I can't, it is definitely childcare. It's also home visiting. It's a whole range of things that matters. I think we've got 260 some school districts offer preschool, so that is pretty universally available, not entirely, but and there are certain enrollment restrictions just because they don't have. It's not funded on the number of kids enrolled. Enrollment is based on the number of slots they have, but based on funding. But it's across the spectrum of services, and it varies greatly depending on where you are in the state.
I'm sure. Melissa, you made a comment about the key
Fund?
fund, and trying to think of what you said, but you said kind of in a perfect world, that would be sustaining itself now. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So the Kansas Endowment for Youth, the acronym is the KEY Fund, was set up to receive the annuity from the master tobacco settlement. And then the law specifies that we're going to use it to benefit children and families in certain ways. The KEY Fund has one destination for annual transfers. That is the Children's Initiative Fund. The purpose of the KEY Fund was to receive the funding, hold some of it, transfer some of it to CIF, but invest what's held. It's the CAPERS board, investment board that manages those investments. They're supposed to be investing and growing an endowment. And ultimately, the goal, the vision was the endowment would create enough income every year to make the Children's Initiative Fund a self-sustaining enterprise. Over time, there have been reasons almost from inception that there have been other ideas for how those funds get used and transfers elsewhere in the system. Right now, our Children's Initiative Fund has about 22 million that is under the management of the Children's Cabinet Governing Board. The other 30-some million is line item, they're pass-through transfers to our partner state agencies. We have managed to work to a place where those transfers at least make sense to the goals of the cabinet, but they are still fund transfers that were initiated at various times of budget duress. So state general fund dollars were transposed with tobacco dollars. So there is a lot of core function that the cabinet dollars, the tobacco dollars are supporting these days.
So I'm clearly so you don't have any control over that?
Statute, right, yeah. I mean, we can, our governing board does an annual budget recommendation, and this goes through the governor's budget. It becomes really difficult for you all because each agency that gets transferred funds, those budgets are in different places. So no one committee, including appropriations, sees the whole Children's Initiative Fund budget. At least in the last few years, when the K-12 budget gets put in its own bill and the base budget is in the base budget bill, our budget is divided between those two bills. So what goes on in appropriations involves DCF transfers and KDHE transfers. What goes on in education are KSDE transfers and the Children's Cabinet operating and our grant programs.
I'm just curious now. So could you, a ballpark figure, how much has been reallocated, I guess, since the inception of this?
We could get you exact numbers, but I would say it's several $100 million.
I'm taking notes. Senator O'Shea has a question. Do you want to come up and use the mic so everybody can hear?
Sure. Thank you. Senator O'Shea, I'm curious how school districts, I know some of them have preschool, some of them don't. How do they fund or how do they make the decision to provide preschools?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. The Kansas preschool pilot program is over 20 years old, so it's a pilot that's been around a long time. It is a grant program, so it is funded with, right now it's $4.1 million from TANF and $4.2 million from the CIF. Get transferred to KSDE, so they have $8.3 million to open grants. I don't think they're taking any new applications at this point because of the existing demand for funds. Districts, and we have a superintendent who probably can help if I get any of this wrong, but there is money in the K-12 formula. You can use general operating funds to open a preschool program if you have students that qualify for 4-year-old at risk or who need special education services. Those funds also can be wrapped in to help offset the cost of running a preschool program. Did I miss anything, Representative Younger? Okay. Oh, yeah.
I just was going to weigh in real quick. Sometimes it's just space.
That's right. Space can be a concern. That's the beauty of the grants that the cabinet gave this last year with federal COVID dollars. And by the way, all of it has been granted. So we have programs operating. I can get a map to caucus chairs if you all are interested. We have granted funding for construction of new or major renovation of existing buildings to support the expansion of childcare across the state. And that ability to fund construction is really constrained. Prior to the COVID dollars, we had never had a funding stream that allowed construction to be funded. So you all will see a $30 million line item in the governor's budget recommendation to give the cabinet $30 million more dollars. We had 2 types of RFPs go out. One had $120 million worth of asks for $40 million worth of funding. The other had $150 million when we had $28 million to give. So $30 million would help us grant. There were plenty of incredibly solid plans that we would have liked to have funded, so it would just give us the chance to expand just a little farther. There are some school districts who are partnered. We were very careful that if they had other sources of construction funding, that these dollars were not the dollars used. So,
Representative Haskins. You want to go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first, great presentation. Second, I love org charts. And so I love the rational redesign of that. And I've heard this presentation, or at least this suggestion, a few times. And so I can't help but think of what justification has been given for not reorganizing it, because that seems like an efficient, rational, something we can get to agree upon. And then I have a follow-up.
So there's curiosity, there's concern about growing government, about expanding FTEs. These are good questions to have a conversation about, because we are not creating a brand new program or service. We are just taking what exists and reorganizing it. The expectation is that we will also reorganize within the existing FTEs. So there may be, some work that has to be done when somebody is half-time on this program and half-time on that, and one moves and one doesn't. That will take some work, but the idea is FTEs are full-time equivalent, not necessarily specific people, and we'll reorganize and get it done. This is actually less bureaucracy than if we left things as they are. So I think that as we sit, and I have not been the one doing most of the one-on-one conversations, but I think lawmakers are beginning to get questions answered and better understand it. So my hope is we have bill hearings.
And that makes sense, and it's understandable. Now, in education, we worked a bill in which we took some of your money and we sent it on to the Attorney General's office so they can fictionally hire a DARE education coordinator. So more money is left. Is it possible that they like the chaotic form, so no one really knows how much money is there, and so they could just make a generalization assumption like, oh, they got plenty of money, let's just take more money from them?
That is generally the rationale for defending. It's House Bill 2613. I went in and testified against the bill because structurally it creates a demand transfer to a fund controlled by the Attorney General's office as an alternative to the Children's Initiative Fund. So thank you for that question.
Do they leave it chaotic so they can just keep taking money?
I mean, once that conduit, once that structural change happens, anything is possible. So.
Representative McDonald. You're good? Senator Sykes.
Thank you. This is more of a comment, but I just want to highlight again that our Children's Initiative Fund, the Children's Cabinet, they are leading the way, and legislative post audits praise them beyond like anything. I mean, our legislative post audits are pretty critical, and the Children's Cabinet and all of their initiatives have always been top notch. And I just want to say, if you are not aware, that in Senate Education last Thursday, we stripped some of these funds out of the Children's Cabinet, so $35 million. At least.
Yeah, for sure. There's the $30 million to reopen the accelerator grants. There's $5 million that would be for a public-private partnership where there is already $10 million of private sector match to our $5 million of public funding. One time to set up a Northwest Kansas endowment and see how having that stable place to help child care providers in their 26 county region helps expand the workforce and access to care. Post-audit, in 2020, the Commerce Economic Development Incentive Fund was audited, and there is a whole section of that audit that points Commerce to the Children's Cabinet for instruction on how to manage and evaluate the impact of their grant program. And then the legislature's efficiency audit in 2015 or 16, the Alvarez and Marsal study really lifted up the cabinet process as the gold standard for state agencies. So it's something that over time has been examined, and you know, my tenure here started in 2019, so a lot of it predates the work that we're doing now, but it's something that I think we as a team are always very happy to explain and proud of the work that the team does.
So I would just maybe caution our legislators in the room and advocates in the room that we have the gold standard, and maybe as Representative Haskins, and maybe we're transferring these monies to cause chaos. And I really think that's a disadvantage to our most vulnerable Kansans. And we can invest early and we can have savings. And knowing that we have the gold standard there, just please let your legislators know that we need to invest in these programs. Thank you.
Senator O'Shea.
I was curious a little bit about how, when we're looking at childcare slots, so for example, for everywhere there's a preschool, I'm glad it's more options, but I'm starting to see this with my son. A lot of people who go to the business owner or the faith-based community, they're like, I'm going to the preschool because it's cheaper, right? And so how do we make sure that the money the government spends is also helping the in-home care providers, those businesses, and the faith-based community, and not just centers or public entities?
So our grants have gone to a variety of programs and providers, including faith-based. There are certain types of grants that are better suited to a home-based provider. We wouldn't pay to add a room to somebody's home because that just, the optics of that, like, you know, are you really adding to their business or are you adding to make their home, like, that's a tough one. So usually those programs have community benefit, and community partnerships are a big criteria of the grants that we operate. But we do have programs that have helped home-based providers, the sustainability grants that were offered. We continue to offer startup grants to help, health and safety grants is what they are. So if, for the purpose of getting licensed and staying licensed, if there is something, what is it 5,000-ish is about the dollar amount, but 4,200 for those grants. So if you need to purchase a fire extinguisher, if you have to alter, you know, a fence or do certain things to get and stay licensed, there are grants available, sustainability grants. And there was $15 million in the governor's budget to do one more year of sustainability grant funding that I think current status is it has been removed. So we're trying.
Any other questions from legislators? Oh. Representative Ruiz, come on up.
That 15 million you just talked about, they got stripped in social services budget, and I'm very embarrassed about. Can we get that back in?
That is up to the will of the body, I guess, would be the best say. That was, it is SGF. I would put it in context. 15 million is proposed. We gave $287 million over the course of the pandemic, so it's one more round to help ease the descent over the cliff, as it were. So I can't answer that, but you all have votes that maybe can help us.
Any other questions, delegation and guests? Come on up, Representative Ruiz.
So our friends in appropriations can put it back in?
That is the budget process. Our friends on the Senate side could leave it in.
Representative Helgerson.
Was the 50 million taken out in House?
15 taken out in Social Service Budget Committee.
SGF?
Yes.
How much money goes for childcare right now?
Right now, the total that we spend on early childhood, I don't know that I have child care broken out. So including $22 million from the 4-year-old at risk, I calculate from the data in those slides, which is part of the Early Childhood Task Force report, $42.5 million in SGF that goes to early childhood. Of that, for child care, there are state general fund dollars that help support the child care subsidy, state matching share, and phoning a friend. Is that 2.6 for the CCDF? Yeah, so I'll get you more specific detail on that, but it's some. There is some, certainly, but I'll let you decide if it's the sort of appropriate use for state general fund dollars to help add additional capacity.
Well, as we're all looking at it, let me I'm going to go back a little bit. The tobacco settlement, there was a time when the tobacco settlement wasn't going anywhere. And I made the motion, carried the bill to get the 50 million, get the money dedicated.
Thank you.
And then
will say that when the cabinet has a grant, we embed community partnership. And for the accelerator grants, we required 25% match from local effort, and we actually saw the local effort far exceed the 25% necessary. So we ended up with a gift from a private family foundation, and we rearranged a federal grant so that we had 40 million. We ended up granting 43.5 million. We had $58 million worth of local match. So communities are stepping up and helping with the cause. So it isn't just looking to the state for a handout. This is really our approach to grant making is public-private partnerships, so that we are able to, infuse sustainability planning into the equation.
And I say that because you're probably going to support him, and I'm going to have to defend the governor's budget, which was, trying to hold the line on it. So it's real difficult trying to do this. But I agree, I've been pretty skeptical, you know that. You made a lot of good points.
Thank you.
I'd like to have some further conversation, and the governor's office was asked for some additional information. And this will not be the first or the last conversation we have.
I'll set up time. We can have an offline discussion. 67% of the Kansas children under the age of 6 are growing up in households where all available parents are in the workforce. So we can have the philosophical discussion about whether we should or should be in the business of helping expand access to childcare, but 2/3 of our workforce needs it, and it becomes then an economic driver. So we'll talk more, and I'll bring you whatever information you want to ask for.
And let me just, the question then is, first, do you provide it? And the legislature really has not had, in the appropriation process, has not had a conversation about this. Do we say that that's a high enough priority? And does it a higher priority than special ed? Because that's what will be decided upon. Do we fund this or this other project, or do we do tax credits? Or we do what other countries have done, and that is give every family X number of dollars when they have a child and say it's up to everybody to make that decision. This has grown gradually without the legislature and the appropriation process in particular, appropriation members buying off on it. And it's coming to a head now where we have to decide that this is the model and this is what we agree to. And at the same time, we're going to have a school finance formula debate in a year or two, and we're having the discussions right now about tax reduction. And I'll have members in the appropriation committee that'll say, we want to have more money going for tax reductions, and at the same time, we want to have more money for these programs. We don't have so much money. I'll throw something else at you.
Okay.
The governor used one-time money, or what they call one-time money, I'm staring at governors, of $1.2 billion. They use it for capital improvements, a lot of it. How would you think if we put that into the Children's Trust Fund as the, and I hate to put you in the middle, but, make that one-time money that goes into a trust fund for children's programs, and, yeah, I know, neither of you like that, but that's, I'll tell you, this is going to come up in the debate. And dedicate that money and say, we haven't done it in the past, but we should do it in the future. And we don't do a lot of these one-time capital improvements that the governor wants to do. And you don't have to answer, and I don't want to get you in hot water. But I'll tell you, that's one of the alternatives I'm looking at.
Representative Helgerson, I appreciate you not making me answer definitively on that question, but I would say that these are appropriate priorities to consider and to really think. We engage in a lot of futures planning and not just the today efforts. So it's really important to think about the fact that a child needing childcare is helping a parent who is a member of today's workforce, but that child is part of tomorrow's workforce. And we've got to be thinking big and globally about the future that we want for Kansas and the economic impact of childcare and quality early childhood programs.
I have time for one more. Senator Sykes.
Thank you. I just want to end with, we have a lot of questions that we are called to ask and answer. But looking at the future, in Kansas, we have invested in our children, but we have not invested a lot of SGF dollars. And when the Federal Reserve is doing studies and looking at how investments in children and early education, early learning, and the payoffs over there, I think if we don't have these conversations, if we don't look at investing and figuring out, yes, we're still putting Band-Aids on programs and we're not going to be able to just stop. I mean, we have to fund SPED. But if we're investing in those early dollars now, the payoff in the next 10 years is going to be huge. So I think this is something that we have to engage in. Yeah. And we have to look at, why are our young families leaving Kansas? How do we have the workforce that we need? And so I think if we discount early learning and child care and all of these issues, we're going to be left on the sidelines.
It was Barry Ford, who's the CEO of the Council for Strong America, which is a business roundtable group, who said it best. I think he said, we are paying for it now. We're just doing it in the dumbest way possible because it's higher special ed costs, it's higher remediation rates, it's higher incarceration rates, it's more substance abuse problems, it's more kids in foster care. If we can get in and help support families so that everyone stays on track, then we identify developmental issues earlier and we intervene sooner and we reduce the overall cost of the kinds of services that our children need as they grow up. In a state where we have a third grade literacy goal, you can't wait till a third grader misses the mark on that standardized test to start figuring out how are we going to fix it. If we intervene early and expose kids to the resources and parents to the kinds of support and education, we can help our kids arrive in kindergarten already equipped to succeed.
Melissa, thank you. And thank you to, go ahead, Emily.
I wanted to make sure before we close out that for next time, and so I want you to say whatever you need to say, but wanted to make sure to make a shameless plug for next.
Please
session.
do.
So in 2 weeks, actually not on a Monday, it'll be on Wednesday, March 6th, you all will have the opportunity to see everything that we just talked about in action. Our early learning advocacy day will be happening on March 6th, starting 9 to 2. And that day we will also host our early learning caucus, and the topic that day will be innovative business solutions. And what you will get to do is hear from our local organizations who are providing that systematic support to our workforce, but then you are going to get to hear from multiple members of the workforce in multiple types of facilities, multiple environments, about how they are using these innovative ideas to operate their programs, give the parents the best of what they have. And so if you will put it on your calendars, save the date, I hope that what you will do is walk out of the session in 2 weeks with a clear idea of why the investment is worth it.
Thank you for that shameless plug. I encourage everybody to be there. And I was remiss earlier in not thanking Child Care Aware of Kansas for providing our delicious lunch today, and also that the stakeholders that are involved in the Early Childhood Learning Caucus have been fabulous. Thank you so much. Typically, we take a delegation photo, but it seems like we're out of time. And I know that if any legislators need contact information for anybody in the caucus, reach out to myself or Senator Pat Petty. And thank you all very much. Have a great Monday.